All right. Now we'll go back to screen share. And let's make this full size. Come on, full size. Here we go. All right. We're going to be talking about one of the most critical aspects of being a successful entrepreneur, and that's how you approach innovation and creativity. Innovation and creativity are critical to the success of an entrepreneur. So how do you become more innovative? Well, there's quite a few things that you can do to make sure that you are innovative. But first, let's talk about some of the enablers of innovation. It starts with passion. Passion is maybe at the core. Entrepreneurs are typically people that are very passionate about something. Specifically, they're passionate about whatever the new concept is that they're working on. Their passion and enthusiasm makes them willing to constantly be trying new things, new ways, new techniques, new ways of doing things, new business models. Entrepreneurs that are innovative tend to have a solid customer connection. They're close to their customers. They listen. They understand the needs. They're empathetic. They help their customers develop creative solutions to things. So a close customer connection is very connected to innovation. Entrepreneurs are agile and adaptable. They adapt and adjust, making necessary pivots, which happen quite often. A pivot, of course, just means you turn directions or you try things new. You try something, you think of something, and you start implementing it, and measurement is key. You have an expectation for results. And when the expectation that you set up for the results of a particular experiment that you're making, a marketing experiment or any other kind of experiment, but typically they're marketing related, when things aren't working out the way you expect them to, be prepared to pivot. Because quite commonly, things will not turn out the way that you expect. Entrepreneurs experiment and improvise constantly. They know that big payoffs come with big risks, and they consider failure an opportunity to learn, to pivot, and to push forward what they're working on. Entrepreneurs always have resource limitations. All companies have resource limitations, but small companies are especially impacted by limited resources. And so innovation is one way that you constantly figure out how to extend and utilize your limited resources as much as possible. You know, you've heard the saying, necessity is the mother of invention. There's a lot of truth to that. Entrepreneurs engage in a lot of information sharing and collaboration. They rely on strong networks and getting feedback that allows them to pivot quickly. Entrepreneurs engage in discovery-driven leadership. There's 6 things that are involved in discovery-driven leadership: associating, questioning, observing, networking, and experimenting. Associating involves the act of drawing connections between ideas, questions, processes, or problems from diverse and unrelated fields of information. Association helps to be, if you're going to be doing a lot of association, it helps to be a prolific reader and an avid networker. If you ever think that you have an original idea, the chances are extremely good that you've just not read enough or you've not talked to enough people. It's actually incredibly rare for somebody to have a truly original idea. You know, in the field of music, almost everybody draws upon previous work. In the field of art and motion pictures and science, everybody draws upon the work of previous people. And there's a lot of, in essence, brainstorming that goes on, in the sense that a great artist sees the work of a master that went before them, and they take that, they practice it, they duplicate it, and then they extend it. Even the great changes of Impressionism and Cubism and all those kinds of things are, if you study art, they're a natural extension of what artists did before them. All scientists build upon the work of previous people. So, you know, it's important for you to derive ideas from the works of others, and that comes from reading and networking. That's the associating. Questioning is where you constantly are posing questions that challenge conventional thinking. And the most common question, of course, would be something along the lines of, why are we doing it this way? Have we ever done it another way? Why don't we do it a different way? How might we do this differently? So an entrepreneur is somebody that very typically constantly looks at the reasons for why things are done the way they are and looks for maybe better ways to do them. They are very observant. They watch the behavior of customers and suppliers and their competitors, and they look for insights into the products and processes and services and business models that exist, and try to find ways to make things better, or niches, angles, directions that they can somehow come at that same problem and gain an advantage or do something easier. Usually very often it's an insight into an easier way to accomplish the same thing. Little tiny flashes of inspiration that cumulatively can make a big difference. Entrepreneurs do a lot of discovery-driven leadership, involves a lot of networking. And that basically means that you want to build the widest possible network with the most divergent types of people with different skills and perspectives, so that you can feed off of what they know and bounce ideas off of them. And then discovery-driven leadership also includes experimentation, which is constantly trying new things, and measuring the impact on business. Measurement is critical. Management is measurement. I'm probably going to say that a dozen times in this course. Entrepreneurship is all about figuring out new ways to do things, but you have to measure the impact of doing things differently to know whether it is really better than the way that it had been being done. So when you want to practice creative thinking, asking a lot of questions is a good thing. You know, is there a better way? Why do we do things this way? A lot of times companies get entrenched in policies. Now, policies are important because policies are necessary to ensure the replication of a high quality productive process, so that you always get the same result. But policies can also lead to bureaucratic thinking of, well, we're doing it this way because we've always done it this way. And so entrepreneurs have to constantly be practicing the thought process of, well, why are we doing it this way? How did we get to this point? What have we tried before? And then looking for new ways to do things. And that means you have to have time to daydream. You have to have time to sit and think. You might want to play some thought experiments, mental games. And most importantly, understand that one of the most critical concepts related to creative thinking and innovation is failure. And, you know, a lot of companies that are very successful, that do a lot of innovating, live by the mantra that don't be afraid of failure. If you're going to fail, fail early, learn quickly, improve, try again, and repeat that process. So failure is not something to necessarily be afraid of. Now, it's not something to be embraced, but it's not something to be afraid of, as long as you learn from the failure and find a way to move forward and improve the process the next time. You know, you look at how Elon Musk is getting his SpaceX rockets to launch. And one of the reasons why he is producing, I don't know how many of y'all are watching what SpaceX is doing, but they're building these, they call them starships, they're rockets. And they have basically an assembly line where they're building them in the fastest that anybody's ever built, rocket after rocket after rocket. And his philosophy is really very simple. It's going to take a lot of iterations to get this right. So the faster we build them and the faster we experiment and the faster we fail, the sooner we get to the point where we have a successful design that we can then scale up in high volume, reducing the cost of launching rockets. And that's an incredible concept that's been put into process with something you wouldn't think of. I mean, rockets are incredibly expensive. So it just goes to show that, he understands the iterative process of fail early, fail often, fail early. I may not be getting them in the right sequence, but fail early, fail often, learn from your mistakes, try again, and repeat that process until you got it right. So there's barriers to creativity. And one of the barriers to creativity, or some of the barriers to creativity, are here on this page. And one of the biggest ones is looking for the right answer, like there is only one right answer. And that's typical of convergent thinking, where convergent thinking is the logical, solutions-oriented, A leads to B leads to C, serial thinking that is taught to us in school. And when we're little kids, we don't know how to think in a convergent, sequential thinking, logical thinking process. And a lot of what school is all about is teaching us how to solve problems and think in a logical fashion. But sometimes that can be counterproductive. You can actually be too logical in many respects. You need to have the ability to depend on divergent thinking, or to incorporate divergent thinking, the creative thinking, left brain, right brain stuff into your thinking process. You've got to be careful about blindly following rules and processes that have been laid down without understanding how and why they got laid down and when to break them. You have to know when to break the rules and be willing to break the rules. Constantly being practical may not be the best way to go about things. A lot of times having play and frivolous moments can be very enlightening, and you want to try to avoid becoming too overly specialized. We live in a world, unfortunately, where specialization tends to be the direction, especially in some professions like the law and medicine and other things, and even engineering. You can't know everything about everything, so you specialize. But that's one of the reasons why networking and association becomes so important. Avoiding ambiguity. Ambiguity can be your friend. Ambiguity challenges you to find new ways to solve things, or stretches you to figure out solutions. Afraid of being foolish. That's certainly a big one. Nobody really likes to appear foolish, but being willing to make mistakes and somehow be maybe potentially perceived as being foolish is, they kind of go together. You have to be capable of understanding that mistakes are part of the process of creativity. Just they're inherently connected. And another barrier to creativity is really just fundamentally thinking that, I'm not creative. You don't think of yourself as a creative person, and that can actually inhibit your ability to be potentially, generate solutions and suggestions that end up, a large part of creativity in the group process may not even be formalized, but it's equivalent to brainstorming. We're going to have a slide. We're going to talk about brainstorming as a specific task or activity here in a few minutes. But when you've got a group of people working on a problem, there's a lot of brainstorming that goes on in an informal way where people toss out ideas, and you've got to be able and willing to toss out ideas, even if the idea that you think you're tossing out might be foolish, because it can be the kernel of an idea that somebody else takes and finds the actual solution, or it might flip around and they toss out something and you think of the right solution. So don't be afraid of trying things. When you're in a corporate environment, it's important to remember that creativity is essential to your corporate success. We live in a world where innovation occurs so rapidly that if we're in a company that is not constantly pushing forward new ideas and new products and new services and new ways of thinking about things, then the companies we work for, the companies we start, get left behind relatively soon. Because if we don't innovate, our competitors will, and pretty soon we won't have a competitive offering for the market. So to make sure that your company has sort of a DNA of creativity and innovation, you have to do certain structural things. And this is a good list of them that we'll kind of go through and talk about. But one and first and foremost is to make innovation and creativity an important core value within the company. And that isn't something you just say, it's something you do. And when I say do, you have to do specific things to make it. You can't just make, paste a note on the wall that says we are now an innovation-oriented company. There are other things that you have to do to craft the culture and support that culture of innovation. And hiring for creativity means specifically hiring people that have creative skills, as well as hiring diversity. People from different backgrounds, different skills, different educational backgrounds, different cultural backgrounds, different skill sets, and different companies. You can't have everybody coming up through the corporate ladder, because there's a corporate think, a group think thing that happens with, if you come in, you need people coming into the company from outside as well as coming up through the company ladder. There's lots of different ways that you have to think about diversity and embrace diversity if you're going to have a truly diverse and creative company. You have to both nourish and reward creativity. You have to expect failure and expect creativity at the same time. And creativity means that you're not always going to think of great things. You're going to think of things, and you're going to try things that seem like they're great, but somehow in the execution or the engineering or the implementation, somewhere in that process, sometimes things aren't going to work. Even great minds thinking about things and trying to figure everything out aren't going to always think of everything. And then there's the customer. The customer may not think the same way you do. So it's important that you allow for failure. Again, you don't ever reward failure, but you don't punish failure. You have to allow failure to happen and have to look at it from the perspective of, okay, what did we learn that can help us improve the next iteration so that we can get to the end game? Now, you also have to be willing sometimes to pull the plug, because sometimes the idea that you have doesn't pan out. You don't want to just keep going down a path of trying to create something and pushing and pushing and pushing. Ultimately, there has to be a want. You might think that you figured out what the market needs, but if the market doesn't want what you have developed, then it doesn't matter how much they need it. You're going to have a constant uphill battle trying to push a product that the market needs into the market. If you can't fairly quickly and easily convert the need into a want in the consumer's mind, it doesn't matter how creative and innovative your new product or service is, you may end up having to pull the plug on it. You want it to be fun, and you want to encourage curiosity in the workplace. And again, you want to allow for that and support that in the workplace. Okay, let me see how I get this to move forward. All right. Another thing is some more things to think about, or to view problems as opportunities. In fact, the word, you've heard this, I'm sure, before, the Chinese word for crisis incorporates danger and opportunity in the same concept of the word. View problems as opportunities. Provide training on how to solve problems creatively. Eliminate the bureaucratic processes that inhibit thinking. Bureaucratic processes exist in all companies of almost any size. They're not just limited to large companies or limited to corporate or to governmental organizations. Bureaucracy is basically policies that become so entrenched that people just don't truly understand why that policy was generated, and they're not capable or willing to ask, is this policy appropriate for this particular situation? You know, you've also heard it said that the Lord gave us two ears and one mouth, so we should listen twice as much as we talk. Well, you especially should engage your customers and listen to your customers. There's no richer source of innovative ideas than your customers. Your customers will complain to you about little things. They may not be big things. They may not be the kinds of things that your customer gets really truly upset about, but they'll let you know about little things. In fact, every time a customer complains about some aspect of your product or service, it's an incredible opportunity for you to change your perspective, and instead of fighting or resisting or taking offense at what the customer says, flip it around and say to yourself, this is an opportunity for me to improve my product. This is an opportunity for me to improve my product or my service or some process that I have inside of my company that caused this lack of appreciation, this point of failure. And you have to really thank the customer for taking the time to let you know of a failure or a failing or a weakness in some aspect of what you're offering to them, because they're really doing you a valuable service. Unfortunately, and it's really easy, I've done it as well, you can often get into the mindset of thinking, oh, but if the customer had just learned or had just done it this way, or if they had just tried harder, or if they'd been a little bit smarter, oh, but if. And you're placing the blame at that point on the customer, where the failing is on your company, your product, and your service. It's a really hard mindset for a lot of business owners to get past, because the business is their baby. And when a customer complains about your baby, you want to go, well, my baby's beautiful. And you know what they're telling you is, yeah, your baby's pretty good looking, but there's a wart on the end of its nose, and we need to address that wart. I don't know if that's a very good analogy, but it's probably the best I can think of at the moment. The point is listen to your customers. Not only do they have ideas for new products and services that can give you opportunities for new revenues, but they're going to tell you where you're failing, and that is a wonderful opportunity for you to smooth out the process and make the process or the product better. Stay connected to the market, stay connected to your industry, stay up with what's going on. There's always new stuff, and you should be constantly listening and watching for new trends in your industry and in other industries that'll spark a thought in your mind. Look for new ways to use your product and services in new markets where you're not currently. And again, and this is an important one, reward your employees for creativity. Your employees and reward customers when they come up with good ideas, but especially your employees. Your employees are your intellectual property reservoir. There was a book written by Larry Keeling, and it's called The 10 Types of Innovation. The book that we have, that you're reading, doesn't really talk specifically about this book, but it really does use the essential 10 types of innovation model. And it's a really interesting book. This is a book that I would encourage those of you that are going to be involved in management of an industry where you have a need for a lot of creativity to stay competitive in your industry. You should read this book. It is one of the best books that I've read in a long time. And it's not a very difficult book, but it's the kind of, it seems like a pretty easy read, but when you'll want to go through it 3 or 4 times because it's so information packed. Most of us, when we think about innovation, we think about a product innovation. Most of us think about something like the iPhone or something similar to that, because they're so iconic as representations of innovative products. Now, especially the original iPhone, but because we're all kind of used to them now, but when the original iPhone came on the market, it was a big deal. But there's a problem with thinking about innovation as it relates to products, because that's only one of the 10 types of innovation. There are way more than just a single form of innovation. And so Larry Keeling and some other people did some research, and they basically looked at about 300 companies that have been around for a long time. 300 companies on the New York Stock Exchange, the NASDAQ, and other exchanges, foreign exchanges. And they looked at a lot of these companies have been around for well over 100 years. And they looked at a couple of different factors. They looked at longevity, and they looked at productivity in terms of PE ratios and things like that. And they were trying to look at some correlations. What are the correlations between companies that have been around for a long time and companies that have a real high price earning ratio, real high value in the market? And they found some interesting correlations. They found that there are essentially 10 types of innovation, and you can see them listed here. We're going to go through them in just a second. But they also found some interesting things out about companies that engage in the 10 types of innovation. So business model innovation, we could do a whole lecture, we could actually do a whole course on this. So we're going to really kind of hit this at a superficial level. But business innovation is, how does your company make money? And I mean, that's really fundamentally the business model innovation aspect. How does your company make money? And there are certain business models that are incredibly disruptive. An example, I'm going to give you a couple of examples of recent business model innovations that had huge impact in the market. Uber, Lyft, and Airbnb. Uber and Lyft completely disrupted the taxi cab market by implementing a rideshare app. They call it disintermediation. That's the formal name for the process of the kind of disruption that Uber and Lyft imposed. Airbnb also is a disintermediator. And basically what that means is they took the middleman out of the equation. So the cab industry used to be that you wanted a cab, you'd call a taxi cab company dispatcher who would call a cab and tell them that you were looking for a ride. And they would tell you to wait outside between about a 15 to 30 minute block of time that the cab would drive by. If the cab saw you, the cab would stop. If the cab didn't see you, they'd move on to their next call. And it was a very inefficient model because it wasn't very customer friendly. So Uber and Lyft came along, did an app where you connect via their technology directly to the cab driver, the Uber driver, or the Lyft driver, and they got rid of the cab companies. That is still having a sort of a ripple down effect because cab companies used to be incredibly valuable. The medallions in New York City used to cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. That's the right to drive a cab on the city streets. That's a disruption that's a business model disruption in an industry that was worth billions and billions of dollars. The same thing in Airbnb applied. There's lots of people that are trying to piggyback conceptually on the Uber concept and do similar disintermediations. But a business model can be a disruptive point of innovation. So can networks and alliances. Networks and alliances are how you join forces with other companies for your mutual benefit. Examples of networks and alliances can be, for example, Target. Target is a company that, of course, we all know, and it has developed networks and alliances with brands, specific brands that make appliances and household items and fashion items. The brands are often European, and you can only get them in Target. You can't get them in any other stores in the United States. Now, you may say, well, a dress is a dress, or a coffee maker is a coffee maker, but the point that I'm getting at here is Target and the brand companies that make the brands, they have aligned themselves together to create increased value. That's an example of how you can create network and alliance innovation. Organizational structure is how do you support and reward your employees' creative efforts? That's one aspect of organizational structure. Companies that are good at creating innovation, like 3M. 3M has been Minnesota Manufacturing and Mining. 3M has been a consistent innovator of products over the long term. And part of that is how they structure their research and development and the interactivity that they encourage between different R&D departments and people so that they cross-pollinate ideas and create new products from that. Core processes, or how does your company create and add value for the customer? You're largely here talking about efficiency types of things. How do you squeeze the maximum efficiency out of your productive process? Product and service performance. This is basically the same as the iPhone. This is your product performance. How do you invent a new product, a better product? Product systems. How can you link multiple products into a system or a platform? Easy examples of product systems are your telecommunications companies like AT&T. AT&T sells, of course, phone service, but they sell internet, they sell satellite, they sell security. They probably sell some other things I don't know of, but AT&T has multiple different products that they can bundle together and make a product system. Another example of product system is Oscar Mayer. Oscar Mayer made cheeses and meats, and one day in a corporate meeting, they said, what if we combine cheeses and meats and add some crackers and put a little sauce in a container? That's a product system. A product system is a way for you to sell more of your individual products, but by bundling them into a system that creates added value to the consumer. Services. How do you provide value-added services beyond what your company's products, beyond just what your company's products and services are? Here we're really talking about sort of after the sales service. You provide a specific service, but how do you service the service you sell? Provide a product, how do you service the product? Channel innovation. How do you get your products and services into customers' hands? Channel innovation can be both marketing channel and distribution channels. So innovation in the marketing and or distribution channel relationships that you have can be a way that you compete in an innovative way. Brand. How does your company identity and what is your company's identity and promise in the market? I don't know how y'all define brand, but I think one of the simplest ways to define brand is it's the promise your company makes. What is the central promise that your company makes? I would say that Disney's promise that they make is we're the happiest place on earth. McDonald's promise is we're a safe place for you to get a predictable burger. I mean, think about this. It's the end of school. I mean, you're traveling with your family and it's late at night and you're driving through West Texas. We've all been on that kind of a trip. It's late at night, about an hour or 2 hours ago, you stopped and you got some soda pops and now you got to stop again. You got to stop and you need a restroom break and you've got little kids in the car and you're coming up on an exit and you see a bunch of signs up there and you immediately recognize the yellow McDonald's sign. And most likely one of the first things that goes through your mind is it's going to be well lit, it's going to be clean, it's going to be safe. Let's stop there. The McDonald's promise isn't specifically that we have a good burger, or even that we have a consistent burger, or even that we have a cheap burger, though those are parts of it. The McDonald's brand promise, and this is critical to their brand, is we're a safe place and a predictable place for you to stop with your family, get a predictable expected meal at a reasonable price. We're a safe place. That's a powerful part of the McDonald's brand. Customer experience. Does your company engage customers and give them a reason to come back and to refer new business? I'm trying to think. Blizzard Entertainment. Blizzard Entertainment, the massive multi-user MMUs, massive multi-user gaming environment. I think, can't remember the name of the game. Some of y'all have used the Blizzard games. You know, that's an incredible customer experience. That's a customer experience that's so powerful that customers have been known in those massive multi-user games, have been known to basically deprive themselves of food and other essentials, and in some rare cases have been accused of contributing to, deaths. But the important thing is the games are so captivating that you feel like you're in another world. That's an incredible customer user experience. But there are all kinds of customer user experiences that can be improved and can make these can be points of innovation. So, that's not a deep dive into any of the 10 types of innovation, but here's what's important. The study that these people found said that companies that routinely are successful at competing on 5 or more of the 10 types, and if you can get to the point where you are innovative in 5 or 6 of the areas of the innovation on the 10 types, you're going to be much more profitable, have a much more sustainable, long-lasting competitive advantage, a significant competitive advantage. We're talking about publicly traded companies. And so the companies that last the longest and the companies that have the highest profit margins and are the most valuable tend to be the companies that have significant innovation across 5, 6, or even more of the 10 types of innovation. So companies are big organizations. I mean, when you're talking about companies like General Electric and Apple and others, you're talking about tens, hundreds of thousands of people and vendors that rely upon the company to continue to sell its products and services. And a company like that cannot just sit around and wait for somebody to have a light bulb moment and go, oh, wow, I just thought of something, and then figure out how to get it into production. They have to have R&D departments. They have to have people that are constantly thinking, but they also about new products and services, but they also have to have a culture that supplies ideas and that encourages innovation and forward thinking at all levels of the company. Long-term competitive advantage requires that the company focus on innovation. Without innovation, companies will quickly become irrelevant and they will see their profit margins erode. Innovation and creativity are critical in today's market to long-term competitive advantage. All right, let's talk about the creative process. There's 7 steps to the creative process, and this is wonderfully outlined in your book. So you guys are going to figure out, I love questions that have nice, easy lists. So I'm just giving you a little heads up right now. The creative process has these 7 steps: preparation, investigation, transformation, incubation, illumination, verification, and implementation. So we're going to go through these slides one by one, and let's talk first about preparation. Okay, so first, you need to kind of get your head right and have a lifetime student sort of mentality and attitude. You need to read a lot. You need to do things like keep notebooks and clip articles, and maybe I know a lot of people that keep a folder or a notebook where they tear out, this is back in the days when there used to be newspapers, but they'll still do magazines, and they get things that they'll tear ideas out or they'll print ideas out and they'll put them in a notebook for easy reference. And they'll build idea books. And these idea books are where they can go and they can kind of thumb through. See, a lot of times we get ideas, we see cool stuff, and we think, oh, well, that's really cool, I'm going to remember that. But you don't remember it because there's another cool thing that comes along in a few minutes. And so you have to have a process of organizing the cool stuff that you come across that stimulates a creative thought in your mind, because if you don't have a way of somehow documenting and retaining that, it's going to just slip through your mind and get away from you. So the idea of clipping articles could very well mean clipping out newspapers, but it could also mean printing articles off that you see cool things or interesting things on some web page or something. And discuss ideas with other people. Join professional groups. I talked about listening skills. Learn to listen to especially what your customers are telling you, because your customers are maybe the richest source of idea information that you have. But one of the biggest problems that a lot of businesses have is they don't talk to their customers enough. They sell a product, they're so focused on sell, 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 deliver, 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 collect the money, and then move on, find somebody else to sell, sell, sell to, that they don't go back and communicate with the customers that they do have and constantly listen to them about, how can I make my stuff better for you? What am I missing that I could be doing? What's the gap in my service? So listen, ask questions, listen. Eliminate creative distractions. Those are all part of the preparation that goes into building a creative and innovative company process. And then there's investigation. You have to define a problem and collect information about how to solve the problem. You have to be very clear about what your problem is. And so once you've listened and got ideas, you think you've got an idea, you think you found a niche. Well, first you have to clearly define what the problem is that you think you're going to solve, and then collect information around that. How severe is that problem? How important is that problem to people? What's the cost people are incurring? How difficult has it been? What are the solutions that are currently out there? I mean, you have to collect all that kind of information. But you got to have crystal clarity about what the problem is that you think you've identified, so that you can then investigate the problem. Once you've defined and collected the information related to how you think the solution to the problem should work, you have to evaluate the data. And here you've got two types of thinking that you need to be aware of: convergent and divergent. Convergent thinking is basically where you do sequential problem solving, sort of logical problem solving. A lot of what you're doing here is you're looking for patterns and similarities in the information that you've collected. Divergent thinking is a little bit more free range. It's sort of the right brain versus the left brain. In your brain, the left side of your brain is typically the mathematically oriented sequential processor, and the right side is where the random thoughts that are not wisdom, but inspiration and stuff like that comes, and the two work together. Well, divergent thinking is really more on the creative side, but your divergent thinking process can look for differences in the information that you've collected. What you're really trying to do is to look for patterns. Human brains are incredibly powerful pattern recognition machines, if you will. We're really good at seeing patterns, even in cases a lot of times where none exists. If you've ever been out to Moab, Utah, and all the rock formations, if you just sit there and look at the rock formations, pretty soon, a lot of times your mind will start trying to see, figures and faces in the different rock, because our brains are just hardwired to look for patterns in random sort of data points. So, seek the patterns that exist and consider alternate solutions. If you're a fan of detective movies like Sherlock Holmes and Columbo and Monk and all that kind of stuff, they all have different ways of going about it, but generally speaking, the information collection process tends to be getting pictures and data points about, the crime scene. They put them on a wall so they can see everything, and then they just spend a lot of time looking at it and researching and digging down, trying to find the patterns, looking for, in their case, the criminal that is guilty or responsible. But they're all describing different ways of organizing information and trying to seek patterns out. So that's the essence of the transformation process, where you take the raw data and you begin to transform it into a meaningful data set. And a lot of times, usually there's a period of incubation where you have to let your conscious and subconscious work on coordinating the data. So a lot of times this kind of stuff just doesn't take place. It's not a, do step A, step B, step C. There's time involved, And you have to have time to get away from the problem. You have to have time to attack it from new directions and new angles, different perspectives. You bouncing it off ideas of other people that might see things differently is often helpful. So, they can all lead to, the light bulb moment when suddenly it does start to come together. But sometimes it's not a light bulb moment, as a series of gradual awakenings or awarenesses that you're on the right path. But usually there's a moment where you go, oh, that's the solution I've been looking for. It may not be like a brilliant flashlight bulb, but it might be, kind of a little LED light bulb. Then there has to be the verification process. The verification process is where you test really, is this really better? Does it work? And usually this involves some sort of investigation or testing with customers or potential customers and things like focus groups or in-home trials or market research. You can do a lot of that kind of stuff. There's all kinds of ways you can do that kind of stuff. But you have to go out and just make sure that the solution that you've come up with, after you've collected and analyzed all this data and gone through the verification or gone through the incubation process, is, does this really work? Is it really going to solve the problem? And are the customers really going to want it? Can we make it? Can we sell it for a profit? Will people buy it? You might try a Kickstarter campaign. I mean, that's an inexpensive way to be able to kind of test your idea in the market. And, if you think you've got a great idea, it might cost you a few $1,000s to prepare a really cool Kickstarter campaign, but you put your prototype out there. And then if nobody wants to buy it, and let's say you raise $50,000, you want to pre-sell. If you don't sell $50,000 worth of your $50 thing, then you say, I'm not going to do it if you can't sell it out. So you can use Kickstarter as a market test tool. And a lot of companies do that. And then you have to ask the question and answer the question. First of all, can we sell the product? And second, is there really a market out there for the product? That's what I mean. Can we sell the product? Is there really a market out there for the product? And then can we make it for the price that we need to make it to be able to sell it for the price that we can sell it, so that whatever that difference is, we can make money. If you can't make money, there's no sense in proceeding. And then finally, there's implementation. And this is the step that entrepreneurs tend to be good at, but a lot of people are not. This is, entrepreneurs are spring-loaded in the let's take action position, ready, aim, fire. Whereas researchers and academics, people that are not in a sort of a mindset to go take an action, they're going to want to continue to study the problem and collect more research. And that's that's one of the differences, generally speaking, between most people that are in the academic world and people that are in the entrepreneur world. Academics know all the things that entrepreneurs know, but entrepreneurs are typically like, okay, I got all this figured out. Let's go make something. Let's go do something. And that's kind of a difference. So the implementation process can, again, use prototypes and test markets and that sort of stuff to be able to get out there and see if there's really a market. All right, so convergent thinking typically presumes that there is a right answer, a single right answer. And this is really largely as a result of sort of the educational process that we've all gone through, and to some degree you're still going through. That there's a right answer to everything, and that's not always the case. Sometimes there's more than one answer that'll do the job, and sometimes it'll do the job just as well as another answer. But convergent thinking tends to lead you to the thinking that there's one right answer, there's a step-by-step sequential process that'll get you there. There's often a formula. It's a very sort of rational man, logical, scientific approach. But there is another way, and that's divergent thinking. Divergent thinking, again, is there sometimes is not a single right answer. In fact, there are sometimes multiple right answers, multiple answers that will achieve the goal. And a lot of times it's not about the most efficient way or the best way to achieve the goal, it's just achieve the goal. And so there might, in some cases, be more than a multiple. There might be a nearly unlimited number of right answers. So that's a large part of what creative thinking and innovation is about just trying different things to see if there are multiple right answers. Failure, as I've mentioned, failure is an essential sort of companion to creativity and innovation. It is, really an essential thing. And one thing that you have to kind of get used to dealing with, because if you're going to be involved in creative and innovative activities, you're going to fail. Even obviously brilliant people will often get completely the wrong answer. Thomas Edison is famous for saying that the phonograph has little or no commercial value. He was significantly wrong on that one. There's a guy named Simon Newcomb who was a famous astronomer back at the turn of the last century, and he made the statement that flight by machines that are heavier than air is unpractical and insignificant, if not, in fact, utterly impossible. Well, he obviously was wrong on that. Grover Cleveland made the statement that sensible and responsible women do not want to vote. Well, we know he was wrong on that. Harry Warner, one of the founders of the movie industry, made the statement that nobody would want to hear actors talk. You'd have to be crazy to want to listen to them. I'm guessing they all sounded like Ross Perot back in his day. Thomas Watson, the chairman of IBM, thought that the entire market for computers in the world was about 5. Of course, that was back in 43, a long time ago, 80 years ago almost now. Ken Olson with Digital Equipment Corporation said that there's no reason for any individual to have a computer in their home. I want to elaborate on that one a little bit because I had a little peripheral run-in with Digital Equipment Corporation. Back in 1980, I graduated from UT Arlington with a degree in accounting, and I went to work for Arthur Andersen. When I went to work for Arthur Andersen, they put me directly into the oil and gas tax accounting department. And so literally my very first day on the job, which was about the 5th or 10th of January, was a warehouse that was ice cold where I was working on a company called May Petroleum. And over the course of about the next 3 months, I worked a lot and I learned a lot about the petroleum industry. And I decided I was pretty infatuated with the petroleum industry, and I thought that I would write a book and I would share my knowledge and wisdom with the world at large. So I wrote about an 18-page booklet called Investing in Oil just in investing in oil. And I called my company the Petroleum Research Institute. Now, in hindsight, that would have probably been a pretty good one to keep hold of, and that was probably a pretty good thing to get started in, but I didn't stay with that. I got sidetracked into other things. But the book, I advertised in the Wall Street Journal. Now, to write the book, and I sold quite a few of them, to write the book, there was not, and this is back in 81 timeframe. The only computers, now, the Apple IIe, I think, was about a year away from being released. I think it was 82 when it was released. I didn't have one. I don't think I even knew if one existed. If I did, I hadn't heard of it. But there were these things called word processing machines. And I had a friend that his wife worked for a law firm, and she was a word processor. That was her job title. She was a word processor. And I had a Corona, Electric Smith Corona typewriter, the kind you type on. It goes ching, 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 ching. And, I'd learned how to type, and I was a pretty good typist. But the problem with the typewriter is you type and then you want to go cut and paste, right? I mean, we all have to cut and paste, but the whole idea of cut and paste was literally you cut with scissors and then you take the paragraph that you want to move around and you use some paper glue and you paste it into different spots once you've written it down. So literally, when you wanted to write a book, you would cut and cut and paste. So you'd type it down and you'd cut and paste onto a big sheet of paper. And then you would give that to somebody, another typist. So you would type it and then you would cut and paste and you'd give it to another typist to go through, or you'd do it yourself and you go through again. So I was writing this little simple 18-page book, and the process of cutting and pasting was just laborious manually. And so I asked my friend if I could hire his wife, and he let me do so, and she typed it for me on a word processor. And I got to thinking, wow, maybe I should just buy one of these things. These are pretty cool machines, because I figured I would write more. And so I went down to Digital Equipment Corporation. They had a showroom office. It looked actually a lot like Apple's iStores, the Apple stores. But this was back in the 1981 timeframe. And I went in and there was this desk. You guys and gals all know the size of the desk that instructors teach on at the front of the room. There was a desk about that size. And it was covered with computer gear. There was a keyboard in a box, and then there was this monitor that was vertically very tall. It was tall because they didn't have mouses and they didn't have scrolling. It was literally, if you wanted a legal size sheet of paper, it had to be on a monitor that was legal tall. If you wanted a standard sheet of paper, it could be on a legal tall monitor, it just wouldn't use it all. So that's what was displaying the paper. And you would scroll up and down with the cursor keys and you would type. I mean, it was way better than using a typewriter. And then of course, part of the machine was the printer, and there was a processor, a printer, a monitor, a keyboard. It was all one big thing. It was called a word processing machine. Now, you and I, we know that what it really was a computer. But Digital Equipment Corporation was selling them as word processing machines. Now, I couldn't afford to buy one because back in 1982, it was like $8,000 to $10,000 machine. That was a lot of money back in 1982. I mean, that would be like $50,000 now. Can you imagine spending $50,000 for a word processing machine? Of course you can. Nobody could. That's ridiculous. Well, what we now know is a computer, they knew as a word processing machine. Digital Equipment Corporation had some of the brightest engineers in the electronics and computer world working for them. And they were all, I'm sure, at some point in this huge conference room having a chat about what should we do next with this thing we've built? What can we do with it? Not a single one of them spoke up and said, hey, let's stop and think about this. Don't we really have a computer that could do other things than word processing? They didn't think about that. Digital Equipment actually had one of the first personal computer-sized boxes and devices that they could have beaten IBM to the market. They could have beaten Apple to the market. If they had just started thinking, what do we really have here, instead of getting caught up in the box thinking, getting caught up in corporate, just the corporate thought mentality, the groupthink mentality. Unfortunately, groupthink is a real thing. Groupthink happens. And we're all subject to it. We're all vulnerable to getting caught up in groupthink. And so one of the things that you have to do when you're wanting a company to be creative is you have to be willing to challenge the status quo. It has to be okay to challenge. You can't quash disparate thoughts. You can't quash creative, out-of-the-box thinking and diminish it because it's not conforming with groupthink. You have to embrace it. That's actually a lot harder than you think. In fact, there are some things that really contribute to that. First is assumptions. Assumptions are the unstated things that we presume, whoops, didn't mean to go forward there. Assumptions are the unstated parameters, constraints that we put on our solution problem-solving approach. It's just, we all make assumptions about things. And we have to be careful that our assumptions are not boxing us in to coming up with a wrong solution. We have to be careful about our conditioning and the habits that we've built, because they are the kinds of things that contribute to us having assumptions. It's important for us to understand what's called the reptilian response mechanism. And the reptilian response mechanism happens at the think it's the medulla, it's either the cortex or, let's go back. It's, there, at the top of the brain stem, there's this little thing about the size of a walnut. And it's the core part, the central part of the brain. Everything, all of your senses, stuff goes in through that. Your touch and your feel and your smell, it all goes through that. And this is the oldest part of the brain. It's the core central part of the brain. And this is where all stimuluses are first dealt with on an autonomic level. Reptiles, whether you're thinking about a snake or an alligator or lizard, it doesn't matter. Reptiles see everything on the planet as one of three things. If you exist to a reptile as one of three things. You're either a threat, or you're food, or you're a mate. If you're not one of those three things, a reptile is going to ignore you. You're basically a rock or a tree. As far as a reptile is concerned, if you're not one of those three things, it's not paying attention to you. Now, we have a similar mechanism in our brain, and I'm going to deal with the threat mechanism aspect of this. Have you ever been in a huge auditorium and it's dark and there's somebody on stage? It could be a lecturer, it could be a musical act, it could be a theater act, it doesn't matter. Something's on stage that you're paying attention to. Way off to this side, somebody gets up and starts to move, and you notice they open a door and almost everybody's head is going to turn and look. We can't help but notice motion. We are hardwired to look at motion as opposed to, I mean, motion is a differentiator in the pattern of the visual periphery or visual range. When motion occurs, we single it out, we look at it, and we assess what is that motion. We're looking for a threat. We're hardwired to do that, just like a reptile. Now, we're hardwired in more ways than just as a reptile. New ideas, anything new in our environment, including new ideas, are treated as if they're potentially a threat. Our first reaction to all new things in our environment is this a threat? Now that works well for us when we're driving and when we're in crowded spaces, because we have to look for those things. But when we're in the world of business, we look at threats a little differently. We look at them as new ideas that might disrupt the status quo. If you're a manager and somebody brings a new idea to you, your first thought is going to be, well, how is that going to impact what's going on? How is that going to harm or upset the status quo? So when new ideas are brought to a manager, the manager's first reaction is this going to bother or hurt things? Is it going to cause a problem? When you bring a new idea to a manager, you need to know that that's going to be their first reaction. So you need to be prepared with objection overcomers. You need to be prepared to overcome the objections and think like a manager and be prepared to overcome the objections that are going to be going through that manager's mind. And flip it around when you become the manager and people are bringing new ideas to you. It's going to be natural for you to assess them as a threat first and then look at them for their potential benefit. So keep in mind that threat assessment happens with everybody and with ideas. And ideas can be a threat to the status quo just as they can be a benefit. Then there's the Pygmalion effect, something else which basically says that expectations have a determining factor, a contributory factor into the results. If you expect good things out of students, if you expect good things out of your kids, you're going to be more likely to get good things and get positive results than if you expect failure. If you expect your team to be creative and to find a solution because you know they can and you reinforce that expectation, you're going to get more solutions than you're going to get failures. If, on the other hand, you diminish and or expect failure, you're going to get more failures than you will solutions. It's the concept of the self-fulfilling prophecy. Let's talk about brainstorming for just a moment because we're just about done. Brainstorming is a wonderful process, but there's a lot of controversy as to whether or not brainstorming is really genuinely effective. There have been a lot of studies that have been done, and they indicate that brainstorming really is only effective if the following things are in place. First and foremost, you must defer judgment. Nothing will quash the quality and quantity of ideas that are being put forth by as much as somebody going, oh, that's stupid or that's silly, especially if that person is a senior person. So when you get a group of people together for a brainstorming session where you're trying to solve a problem, your first thing is to encourage any and all ideas, use them, get them out there, no matter how silly they might be, because even a silly idea might stimulate somebody else's creative idea that finds the solution to the problem. Quantity is quality. So you want to get as many ideas out there as you possibly can. Use a facilitator that is outside the department. Don't use a supervisor in the department, because nobody wants to put ideas that are silly out there in front of somebody that has authority over them and might consider them to be less than, sort of properly serious about their job. Limit the time and limit the size of the group, typically to about a group that can consume 2 super giant sized pizzas. I'm talking about 14, 16 inchers. So in other words, limit the group to somewhere between 6 to 10 people. Anything larger than that, and it starts to become counterproductive. Put them in a circle so that they can react with each other, or make 2 different groups in a circle around a table so that you get sort of competing groups for competing for the most ideas. Diversity is a great idea, because the more people from diverse backgrounds and diverse skill sets and diverse perspectives, the more good ideas that you're going to get. So those are some good ways to stimulate brainstorming. And then last but not least, always try to ask the question, how might we? Encourage people at all levels of your organization to be willing to politely challenge the status quo and ask the question of, how might we do this differently? Have we considered this other way? And just because they don't like the answer doesn't mean that or you don't like the question does. And maybe the answer is yes, we've thought about that, but stimulate, allow, encourage people to ask questions and to challenge leadership and authority. Because it's only by leadership and authority being willing to be challenged that ideas are going to percolate up and achieve some opportunity to be looked at seriously. All right, now we're done. We have finished the creativity and innovation lecture. Hopefully that is helpful to y'all. So Ryan's got the rule at his office is the best idea wins. Yeah, well, that's good. Best ideas should win. Absolutely. The question is, how do you know it's the best idea? All right. Anybody have any questions on this topic? All right, I don't see any hands. I don't see any questions. So I'm just going to say, ciao, baby. We're done for the day. And I will see you back here on same time, same channel on Thursday. Y'all have a wonderful, wonderful couple of days, and we'll see you Thursday. Bye.